I introduce our next speaker, Professor Jonathan Jansen, he's a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University. He's the former Vice Chancellor of the University of the Free State, and he spent a year as a fellow at the Center of Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. He's currently the president of South Africa's Institute of Race Relations and Academy of Science. He started his career as a biology teacher here in the Cape after receiving a science degree from the University of the Western Cape. Thereafter, he obtained a MS degree from Cornell University and a PhD from Stanford. He holds various honorary degrees from the University of Edinburgh, the University of Vermont, and Cleveland State University. In 2013, he was awarded the Education Africa Lifetime Achiever Award in New York, the SPEN-Love Award from the University of California for his contributions to tolerance, democracy, and human rights. He's written several books, and a book award he received from the British Academy for the Social Sciences and Humanities for his book Knowledge in the Blood. In 2017, Professor Jonathan Jansen also received an A rating from the NRF, that's the National Research Foundation, marking him as a leading international scholar in his field. His recent books include Leading for Change, As by Fire, The End of the South African University, Interracial Intimacies on Campuses, and Song for Sarah. I ask that we rise as we welcome our guest speaker tonight, Professor Jonathan Jansen.
It is good to be here. I have to hand it, I've now worked at 5 South African universities in various capacities, and I have to commend Peter and his team for an absolutely amazing organization. This is slick. This is what they would call, this is incredible slick and very impressive. And as a former Vice Chancellor, I said to myself on the 2 occasions I heard Pete speak that if I had 7 deans like him, we would change the world. I love his passion, I love his knowledge, I love his incredible sense as a South African of a commitment to all our people. And that I love his sense of Africa as a continent, but I also love his sense of the globe as a place in which to play. Whatever your field. So well done. Ms. Collison, Mr. Mabudu called me almost every single day to make sure that I had everything. And then when I got here, the security guard didn't know. I'm dead serious. Didn't know I was the keynote speaker. And I couldn't find parking. And when I eventually did, it was next to a couple making out in a car. So, up to that point, the organization was incredibly slick. So thank you for the kind introduction. You are very, very impressive. My God, I hope we can work together one day somewhere. You are good for this country and good for this university, not just because you speak and present well, but because you achieve well. And give a round of applause to our MC. And I really must change that introduction. The only thing people need to know about me that's important to me is that I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher by profession. The rest is just stuff, And the other day I was speaking to 1,000 principals in the UK, and they call their principals their head teachers. And the guy that spoke before me, they introduced him and they said, the speaker in this case really needs no introduction because the bastard didn't show up. And I thought that was only Irish people talk like that, etc., etc. Anyway, thank you very much for the invitation. I want to talk to you about, I thought a lot about what to say to you this evening because I really enjoy talking to students, whether it's undergraduate or postgraduate students. In fact, last week I spoke to 3 courses at the University of Stellenbosch, partly because I just want to figure out what makes this place stick. Because Stellenbosch it's not like any other place I've worked before, I've never seen so much wealth concentrated in one. It's the only university not run by its council. It's run by 12 really, really rich guys, And And everybody presumes to speak Afrikaans. Wherever I go, people just start speaking Afrikaans to me. And because I can't speak Afrikaans, I must press, I speak English, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a strange place, Stellenbosch. It's an incredibly beautiful college town environment until you move outside the perimeter and then you hit the I'm going to say canteen, but yeah, the different drinking places. Incredible part. It's completely different from the southern suburbs where I grew up, and so on. And I shouldn't say too much here, because the registrar is sitting here, and the registrar in the university is the most powerful person, so I could be out of a job before I even started. But let me just say the following. So I at about 4 o'clock this afternoon, I said, no, just dump the speech that I prepared. If you want to look at it, I can email it to you. But let me talk to you about something else. And it's a little bit about what I worry about in South Africa, and that is the students that we profess to teach, and what they do and what they become. And I want to talk to you about that a little bit, because you are, in fact, in a very dangerous country. Everybody looks normal, yeah, until you meet them. And this is a country in which we just discovered, through the Pearl study, a literacy and reading study, that up to almost 8 out of 10 kids cannot read for understanding. This is a country that is highly unequal. In fact, 200 schools in South Africa, high schools, account for more than 83% of the mathematics distinctions, which is more than all the other 6,146 schools combined. So it is highly unequal, it is deeply inefficient. Of the 100 kids that start off in grade 1, only 4 of them will get a degree, and that in 6 years. And these are not medical students. So, so you're dealing with a system that is highly inefficient, in which when your Minister of Basic Education lies to you every January, I'm always amazed how people just listen to her crap. When she lies to you and says the system is improving, how do you square that with the fact that we know that the foundations of education are so weak? And most research in education is equivocal, except for one piece of research, and that's the research on preschool education. So if you went to a quality preschool education and another kid didn't go to a quality preschool education, by the time you hit grade 1, that gap is huge. That's the first news. The really bad news is you never make it up. And so overall in the system, you're dealing with, you are the cream of the crop, but the inefficient system of education means that very often, for example, of the 1,200 students who graduate with PhDs every year in the 26 public universities in South Africa, we now have a situation in which most of them are from other African countries, which, by the way, is a good thing. But what is not good is that the pipeline for South African students is incredibly weak as you go from grade 1 to. So what the minister doesn't tell you, that 500,000 kids fall out between grades 1 and 12, and most of them between grades 10 and 12. So you have a system that is completely dysfunctional. And when I spoke to the fund managers and investors of Coronation this morning in Cape Town, I could see the concern in their faces, because they are worried about who replaces them. In other words, in your language, they worry about human capital. Where is that human capital going to come from? So you will do well in a country with such an incredibly unequal and inefficient education system, because you are the cream of the crop. You're studying at what for me is one of the best universities in the world. You have a program here that is exceptional. Even I sat there getting goosebumps, and I'm a COFC. So, this is an incredible place to be, but you're not safe until all our students are safe. Your child is not doing well until everybody's child. You see, that's the value system I grew up in, and you have a huge responsibility to live that out in your own commitment. So what I worry about, particularly since 2015 and 2016, was the incredible failure, I think, of education in the very violent protests that we saw. Now, let me be clear. I think in 2015, around Roads Must Fall, and even in the beginning of Fees Must Fall, as these things were dubbed, these movements were dubbed, we had, I thought, what I would call a very noble protest. A protest which was broad-based, which was non-racial, which was inclusive, and which was focused on very specific issues that needed to happen in our country. And then it turned into something else. And people didn't recognize, and some refused to recognize, when it became a fascist movement, when it became a movement that was incredibly violent, incredibly racist, incredibly misogynistic, and nobody would call that kind of behavior, you know. And so we sit in a situation in which you no longer are able to reason. I was invited the other day, this week, in fact, by UCT to come and debate with some students on decolonization. I said, no, it's a waste of my time. It's going to be a spectacle. I want to talk to people who can think, and who can think deeply about some of the complex issues facing us. So one of the first qualities you must have, which I haven't quite heard here today, if you want to be successful as a graduate student, is to be skeptical of other people's ideas. And what this means is when somebody lobs into the public discourse a term like decolonization, you don't jump on the bandwagon and talk decolonization. You say, whoa, 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 whoa. What does this mean? When somebody says to you, radical economic transformation, which, by the way, I think is a nice idea, but your role as a thinker, as an intellectual, as somebody who is a researcher, is to sort of say, wag 'n bietjie, what on earth is this about? Why now? Where did it come from? For 20 years, we didn't do, presumably, radical economic transformation. Why are you saying, and why are the people saying it, the most corrupt people in the country? When people say white monopoly capital, yeah, I get it. But why now? What was it before? And so part of your job as a thinker, particularly since I presume most of you do some research attached to the MBA or the other degrees, is to begin to ask yourself, what do these concepts mean? Where do they come from? Who's using them? And why now? So decolonization for me is a joke. Okay? It really is a joke. Because first of all, you had at least 4 knowledge regimes in the history of South Africa. The one was clearly colonialism under the Dutch and the East India Company. And then, of course, the British. And then again, the Dutch and the British fought among themselves over black lives. And then you had a period of segregation in the post-Union years. And then you had apartheid. And then you had, for the past 21 years, a black government in charge of determining what knowledge, to quote George Counts, would counts as the most worth. So to simply make everything that's wrong in the curriculum now a reflex of colonialism is ridiculous. It's as if nothing else happened. And by the way, it's not like the things that happened under colonialism is all bad. And I'm not, what's that word? I'm not sort of signaling Alan Ziller here, because I think, and I really think that woman needs to stop tweeting. My God, you know, she is an embarrassment. But are we streaming live? Yeah. And I'm dead sure she's going to, I am dead sure before midnight I'm going to get something from Ellen, you know. But don't make a fool of yourself. Yeah, but think about what you're doing. So, for example, if you want to decolonize the curriculum of a South African university, stop teaching in English. And if you really want to upset black nationalists, tell them to decolonize soccer. Oh my God, you know, everybody gets very upset. So there are things that we do and use from our past that are useful and strategic and valuable, and there are things that must go. But it is not the case that when you look at the curriculum of South African universities, public universities today, that nothing has changed. That is so ridiculous. It is also true that a lot still needs to change. That is also true, and I've written books about that. But my point simply is, if you're going to do a literature review for your subject, and you do what almost every South African student that I work with does, which is then to say, Nordia said this, you know, Jansen said this, Retief said this, you know, Chambers said that, then already you're showing that you are not confident in your own self to be critical of the received authorities in the literature. And so one of the very first things to do is to be skeptical of other people's ideas. Secondly, you need to set for yourself a standard beyond the passing grade. And I'm very glad you had a role model here in this young lady, because what worries me incredibly is how unconscious South Africans are about how low the standard is for academic pursuits. You don't know it because you come through a school system in which you can pass 3 subjects with 30% and the other 3 with 40%, including our home language. In what country in the world do you set the bar so low? This is a country that makes up for the poor teaching of children in mathematics by teaching them a dummy subject called mathematical literacy. It should be banned. This is a country, because it gives up on fighting the incredibly skewed value system from the top down, that they introduce a subject into schools, which is another joke, called life orientation. Life orientation should happen in the home. Life orientation should happen in the church, the mosque, the synagogue, and the temple, but it should not happen in a school. Stop wasting their time. Because what you're doing in the process is that you are, in fact, doing what South Africans do very well, which is to focus on what I called in one of my Times columns, corrective knowledge, that is trying to correct the past, and losing sight of prospective knowledge, that is the knowledge of the future. Okay? So instead of teaching life orientation and mathematical literacy and all this crap, how about teaching the kids, as I saw the other day in the Silicon Valley, at Castellia High School, at schools in East Oakland, where they're teaching the kids neurobiology, automation, applied mathematics, artificial intelligence. Why? Because that is the labor market of the future. What we're still doing is trying to figure out what to do with a dead white man's statue. And it seems to me we've completely lost sight of the fact that even preparing young South African children for what South Africans too glibly refer to as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, what we're failing to do is to recognize that that in itself is an act of social justice. Social justice isn't just about correcting the past. It is preparing students for the future. The problem is you come out of a system that thinks you idiots. Did I make that up? No. Let me prove it to you. And I want you South Africans here, and welcome to all our international students, but I want the South Africans here to be absolutely honest. I'm going to just show you a short experiment. I've done this 100 times, and every time it works. When you were at university in South Africa, did you have at least one professor who said something like this? Welcome to Biochemistry 354. By the end of the first semester, half of you will be gone. Hands up if you had a professor like that. Even the registrar had a professor like that. My God, are we in trouble, you know? The truth is we all had them. I had them at UWC, you know, you've had them and so on and so forth. And a friend of mine went to MIT and he said, he's a nervous South African, and he says he got in there and the professor said, look to your left and look to your right, and he said to himself, "Wie gaan ons alweer?" And the professor said, the one next to you would one day be the CEO of IBM and the other one of Hewlett-Packard. In other words, the orientation, and that is why South African students, the moment they leave this country, they do well. The other day I was in the most expensive shopping center in the world. It's called the Stanford Shopping Center, and I walked in there, and I saw a car with the wings up like that, the flaps. And I said, oh my Lord, I'm a boy, you know. Oh my Lord, look at this. And there was this woman standing with this incredible brochure, you know. And I walked up to her and I said to her, you know, because I also want to feel proud, you know. I said to her, I'll have you know that the man who built that car went to the same high school as my son at Pretoria Boys. Of course, my son took the wrong turn, but no, you know, and so on. And so everybody there knows Elon Musk, but Elon Musk has to leave here to make it big there, you know. The dean, former dean of the medical school at Stanford University, I've gone out to lunch with him a few times, and so on. And I said to him, wait a minute, you went to Pretoria Boys. How the hell did you come here? He said, you know, the only way I could win the Nobel Prize in chemistry is when I left the country. And so there's something wrong in our culture in that we start off with the notion that you can't, rather than with the notion that you can. It breaks my heart every time I go, as I did a few weeks ago, to Castellia High School, which is the girls' high school, which is probably the most expensive school in the world. And I sat there with these girls because they had a week on inequality. The previous year, they had something on climate change in the cities. These are high school kids. Okay, Steve Jobs' daughter was in the school, so it's a fairly to-do school across from the university. And then I come and I work at Oscar Mpeta High School, which is probably the most dysfunctional school in the country, in Nyanga. And what strikes me every time is that there's absolutely no difference between a kid at Castellia and a kid at Oscar Mpeta. The only difference is the structure of opportunity. You see, children are the dependent variable. What they do, your input-output model, depends entirely what adults put into their lives. And so you're in a country that fails our children, and you carry with you that mindset into adulthood that you don't believe you can. And I'm here to tell you today, you can. This degree is not difficult at all, whichever degree you do. What is difficult is your attitude towards the subject. You are smart. You are smarter than you think. You are certainly smarter than your teacher told you. I remember if I had to believe everything my teachers told me, in primary school my mathematics marks were negative integers. But if I had to, because they took away marks if you guessed in a multiple choice. But if I had to listen to most of those teachers and not to the ones that really, told you what you can do, then of course you'd go nowhere. And finally, what I've discovered among the many master's and doctoral students that I had the privilege of teaching and graduating is that there is something in them that explains their success, not something outside of them. In other words, there is, and again, I'm building on, what's your name again? Shahida. I'm building on Shahida's point here. It really is dependent on what is in you. Now, I have to tell you, there's a gendered dilemma here. Those of you a South African women who have married a South African man, you're in deep shit. Okay? And the reason you're in trouble is because South African men have great difficulty, I discovered with my students, in adjusting to the fact that the wife is studying. Because you see, he, like his father, expects you to be there and to make him a meal and to bring him his slippers. Now, use the slippers and clap him, but that's your first dilemma. Your kids are used to a certain thing. So one of the things that is going to be a real challenge for you is just dealing with the domestic situation. I remember when I sent my young professors, my young senior lecturers, I wanted them to become top professors in the world, and the best thing to do in the Free State, or at Turkey's where I was, is send them out of the country. So I did that consistently to work with the best scholar in their fields, wherever they might be. So I brought all of these young senior lecturers together, and and I decided on the final night I'm bringing their husbands, and their spouses. So the husbands, mainly husbands and wives, came as well. And just as I was sort of going to close the situation, to say to them, you're going to have to get used to the fact that your wife, and in some cases the husband, is not going to always be there, in this very patriarchal relationship. A pastor from one of the Mangaung churches then got up, and his wife, Tabi Singh, was going off to the University of Washington in Seattle, and he said in front of everybody, it was so embarrassing, he said, Professor, that's fine if you want to send my wife away, but have you considered the impact on my sex life? Now, of course I didn't consider the impact on his sex life, but I don't know, Pete, whether you level with the students here that these things are also important. So, the point I wish to make with you is a very simple one, and it's a point that you will, of course, succeed. You're in a really good place with outstanding academics. And every alumnus that I've spoken to from this business school, people I know, speak very, very well of their experience, and some of them are here, of their experience in the USB. So that part, as Shahida said, I'm not worried about. What I worry about is whether you'll be able to stay the course, whether you will commit with all your talent to doing well. As a young man, with this I close, I really do, will close, because there's a Spurs game on. This young man got 98% in history in the grade 12 exams. And the sub-examiner for history from St. Cyprian's School called me and said, I'm not supposed to tell you, but there's this young man, Sinogolo, who got 98% history. I don't know what he's doing. Can you find him and find out? So I was still a rector at the time at Free State. So I went onto Facebook and found this young man. And I said to him, Sinogolo, what are you doing at the moment? He said, no, Professor, I'm on my way to Golden Arrow bus company because I want to get a driver's license to drive a bus. 98% history. I said, could you please go home, pack your bags, and when you're done, go to the bus station, and there's a ticket waiting for you. And we're going to fund your studies for free for the next one. Because I knew a kid from Layanga, from Oscar and Peta, with that kind of mark. By the way, does anybody here know, Registrar, you have a lot of experience. Can you give me a guess as to why this kid got 98% in history?
Why you got?
Yeah.
You studied.
Oh, please. I'm so sorry to do this to all you xenophobes from South Africa. His teacher was from Zimbabwe. You know, it is, as they say in your language, voor die hand liggend, you know, and so on. And he climbed on the bus and came through to the Free State and had breakfast at home with a kid from Delft that I also sponsored. And I knew what was going to happen. Within 3 months, he came into my office, tears running down his cheek. I have to go home. My father left home. My mother and my sister have to push the furniture against the door of the shack so that they don't get assaulted. I'm the man now, I've got to take care of them. I said, no, you're not going home, because if you go home, you'll stay in that shack for the rest of your life. So I called his mother. She worked at the Cape Town airport, and I said, ma'am, if you tell me your son must come home, he'll come home. She said, no, keep him there. I don't want to stay in the shack. And so I said, what can we do? And we provided security at night so that she was safe with her daughter. It's extremely difficult if you're a young boy on the Cape Flats, because you're always being pulled back into this ugly stuff. Well, guess what? 3 months ago, he calls me, he says, Prof, you won't believe it. I've just won the Nelson Mandela Rhodes Scholarship for postgraduate studies in the teaching of history. And I said, what are your plans? He says, I want to become the next Vice Chancellor. You'll see this on his Facebook page, the next Vice Chancellor of WITS. I said, Sinakola, I told you to have standards. But anyway, that's another story. That's another story. That's another story. And last week, the Fulbright Commission sent me, and I know you'll get it, the Fulbright Commission sent me one of those Embark online referee things, and I wrote him 10 pages and so on of a referee thing. And he wants to do his PhD in the teaching of history at Stanford University, and I know you will get it. The point is this. That young man did not define himself by the circumstances of a dysfunctional school. He defined himself by something deep within him, and that is why he, like you, will be successful. Thank you very much.